We will begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can't make your own fragments of silicon, store-bought is fine.
Welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon, the European interviews. Joining us this week is Pascal Haymann of, or is it Haymann?
Haymann.
Haymann, okay. Of Firefly Studios. Right, so you do PR out of Firefly, Germany, correct?
Yeah, so I'm basically the German guy in the company.
Right.
It's where the name comes from. When people try to pronounce it English, it sounds like a Hyman. It's always a bit awkward. So, no, Haymann is fine. Yeah, I'm the German guy at Firefly Studios. I do community management, PR, and support for everything German and tons of English stuff as well.
Right, and I think we talked about this before, but we like to start things out by getting to know the people who come before us, and we start things by finding out, what got you interested in video games, both as a hobby and professionally.
As a hobby, I think it all started. God, this is 21 years ago now. For one of my birthdays, I got this little handheld. This is pre-Game Boy, at least for me, a pre-Game Boy era. I think the game already existed. It was a simple video game of where you made a rocket just go up and down, you shoot some stuff, and it was the only game on that device. But I really loved it, and I guess that was the first video game I played for hours and hours. And then 2 years later, my dad took me to store, and for Christmas, and this was special because my dad hadn't actually gotten me that many Christmas presents. My parents separated. He took me to store, and he just grabbed this huge box, left the store, and said, "Happy birthday." And I didn't quite realize what he had actually grabbed. It was a Super Nintendo, so top of the art system back in the day. And I started playing Mario Kart. I started playing Donkey Kong, and yeah, that got me really into it. Like, I just spend all my evenings and hours whenever my mom would let me playing those games, and that was my first big experience. And then later is when I was given a computer and was able to choose the own games I played. I spent a lot of time playing strategy games. So I was a big fan of Age of Empires back in the day, Empire Earth. I love that, going from, the beginning of civilization up until past where we are as humanity right now. Yeah, so I spent way too much time, I would say, looking back in front of the computer playing games, but it was more fun than going out and playing football.
I can agree to that.
Less likely to break a leg too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at some point your fingers and hands might hurt because you're clicking so much on the mouse, but yeah. And then because I still love my Nintendo days, I went through the Nintendo cycles up until GameCube, and then I just realized, okay, there's something missing here from Nintendo that I need. It seemed too childish at some point, and afraid to even say that live. But I switched to the PlayStation, and ever since I've played a lot more serious games, and GTA has been one of my all-time favorites ever since.
I've enjoyed some of the GTA games. Some of them not so much. Never was a big fan of the original. Granted, I don't think
the top-down one.
Yeah, the top-down one. or really GTA 2. Like, really, the series didn't get good until it went 3D, in my estimation. I know they have their fans, but I just never liked their design.
Yeah. I played, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 as a kid when I got my first computer. It was still on floppy disks, if I remember correctly. And I was very young back then, and I didn't quite understand what the game was about. For me, it was just driving around and trying to run over the people that were jogging in the line. Like, just getting as many points at running over people that I didn't even look at the story in any way. But one day my mum walked in and she saw what I was doing. I was just running people over, and apparently the narrator said all these really bad words, and I got screamed at for so long and forbidden to ever play that game again because of the language. And I said to her, I'm not even listening to the story. She's like, no, but he's telling you to kill people, and that's horrible, and I don't want to play that game. So it wasn't until many years later when I was able to kind of choose my own games and do things in my own room that I picked up San Andreas. And I don't think I've played any game, like I've not completed any game as often as I have San Andreas. I think I've played through it 7 times. Beautiful game.
It's been a while since I played San Andreas. Um, like, I suppose a bit of a side question is, like, was Grand Theft Auto, like, available in Germany for sale? Because I know they have really strict censorship laws over there.
We do have quite some censorship laws, but San Andreas didn't qualify for any of that. I mean, there wasn't any Nazi symbolism. The brutality wasn't overt. If I remember correctly, there were a few differences between the German and the international version. Like that, when you killed people, they didn't drop any money. As far as I remember,
to try
I saw
to remove the incentive.
Yeah, exactly. Years later, I saw this news report on, every time someone gets killed in German schools, which doesn't happen a lot. It's like every few years someone gets shot. They always blame video games. And so they did a report on San Andreas, how brutal it is, all the stuff you do, killing people with chainsaws and then collecting money. And for some of the stuff they showed in the clip, I thought back and I noticed none of that is possible in the German version. Like, what are they even talking about? You literally cannot do the things they are blaming on that game. So yeah, there might be a few differences, but it was still brutal enough to be fun.
Yeah. At least they had moved past making everybody a robot.
Exactly.
Yeah. For those who don't know, back in the '90s, you couldn't show like humans getting killed in Germany, which is why we got that version of Turok 1, where all the humans were changed to robots.
Or zombies.
I think Contra too, although that obviously didn't have much visual change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Probotector, as it was called. Anyway.
Yeah. No, it seems like the San Andreas came after that whole hype.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so when did you make the transition into the industry?
That actually happened a while later. When I finished school, I actually stopped playing a lot just because I didn't have the time. When I started studying, I went to Scotland to study physics. And in my second year, I was quite miserable in my job. I was washing cars in the car wash, which wasn't great. I'd just been fired from my very first job. I needed something to like a bridge job, and so I was there every weekend washing these cars out in the cold, and it is cold in Scottish winter. And I just realized I need something else. I need to change something. And I kept thinking about what am I able to do? Like, what am I good at? And that's a really tough question to answer when you're young and you're still at university and you don't really know the world of working out there. And by chance, someone I knew at university said to me, "Hey, Pascal, my boyfriend, he just started working for this gaming company. They do a strategy game. They're looking for someone German for the online game that they're bringing out. And I thought that is perfect. I mean, I loved strategy games when I was a kid. I spent years playing Age of Empires, um, and it was good to have a job that would require my German skills, abroad. So I immediately ran into their offices. It was like 20 minutes from university. I sprinted there immediately, knocked on the door, and said, "Hey, I heard you guys are looking for me." And you can imagine their reaction. They're like, "The hell is he talking about? What's he doing here?" But I spoke to the boss. Because Firefly Studios have their quality assurance office up in Aberdeen. And I talked to them. I did a little test translation. I went in there again for a job interview, and that's how I started at Firefly Studios. And I didn't actually do any community management in the beginning. It was really just being an administrator and a support guy for Stronghold Kingdoms. So this was early 2010 when Stronghold Kingdoms just launched the first German world. So it's basically Stronghold, but as an MMO.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I spent most of my days helping players that needed technical support or banning naughty people from using the chat system and getting active in the community. And I never thought that I would end up in the games industry. And looking back, I realized that I could have spared a lot of discussions and fights with my mom if one day I could tell her, I'm gonna have a proper job due to all this gaming, all this playing. But hindsight is
assuming they
2020,
believe you.
right? Yeah, of course.
Life.
I don't think my mom knew that that industry existed as a job market. Yeah, most people don't.
Yeah. Like, life certainly has its twists and turns, I suppose. Like, right. Anyway, so how has the PR job evolved over the years?
Well, Firefly is a very small company, so a lot of people have various tasks. I mean, obviously the programmers do the program and the artists do the artist. But like the support team does a lot of different things, and with the experience I gained in the company, the task list somehow grew in the amount of responsibility that I was given. And doing community management was a natural development for me being the German guy, because a few years ago the company decided to expand the community management aspect and the way we interact with fans. So it was natural that I would take over those responsibilities and I'd be more in direct contact with the players outside of support and also handle things on the German press side because, I mean, I knew the game very well. I knew the community already, and it was a perfect position for me.
Now, in terms of the German language, do you help out with any of the localization efforts?
Yeah, so for Stronghold Kingdoms, it's an ongoing process, obviously. MMOs always expand continuously, so I do all the localization for that. The larger games, like the Stronghold, Crusader 2, for instance, those are typically done by external companies, just because the games are massive. But Metamorph, for instance, the one that just came out, I'm likely going to do the localization for that game.
Makes sense. Scale is everything. Like, how many people work at Firefly? In total.
That's a tough question. Very tough question. My guess would be, because there's 3 offices and then there's tons of people that work remotely, so it's always really hard to keep track of who's there. Around 30. 30, 32 maybe. If any of my bosses are listening, maybe they'll correct me soon. Yeah, but it's not a large studio considering that we have multiple projects always running at the same time and expanding the existing games.
I suppose if I had to quantify it, mid-sized indie studio. Like we've certainly had smaller, but we've also had larger as well.
Well, some companies are literally
Yes,
just
absolutely.
Yeah, it's like.
And the cool thing is,
Uh-huh.
when I joined Firefly, it wasn't an indie studio. So when I joined, it was a regular gaming company. They had their publishers, and you know, didn't have the whole decision range when it came to making games. But shortly after I joined, um, they'd just been through some tough times with some of the publishing companies they work with. And due to the success of Strong Kingdoms, the founders decided, okay, if we really want to make the games that we want to make, then we need to go indie. And they said goodbye to the publishing world and started doing that themselves, which is also one of the reasons that the need for community management became so much bigger, because now we're doing all the marketing ourselves. And we're, yeah, basically the face of the company wherever you're trying to buy it, buy the games. So yeah, we're now an indie studio. Weren't an indie studio 5 years ago.
Right, because I've seen Stronghold games on store shelves. The like the earlier ones were published by various labels of 2K Games, Take Two Interactive, example, which is a pretty big publisher. Versus now, where it's them going it alone.
So when we made Crusader 2, when we made Crusader 2, the reboot of the fan favorite, we realized we need to get rid of any publisher pressure. We don't want anyone else to influence the process and the development of making the game. So that was all self-published. Apart from the box version, you can get Stronghold Crusader 2 in stores, at least in Germany, because Germany just loves Stronghold. So we worked together with a publisher there, but we were still in charge in that sense. They just took care of distributing that into the stores. And that was a great relation.
Yeah, I've heard of that before, like extreme localized versions, or it's like digital games that get like a box release in one specific country. Germany comes up often, sometimes Poland, so on and so forth. Like, anyway, so
yeah, people here really love having box versions in their hands.
Yeah, but for those who don't know, box versions are still of PC games are still very much a thing in Europe.
Also
I imagine
Japan
a
as
lot
well.
of those do just include download codes.
Possibly, but I think at least the disc.
Yeah, there's possibly a disc with a base client, but it still needs to connect to Steam or something to get its updates.
Yeah, and I mean in the current development climate, especially for Indie Studio, there are updates that go out between creating the boxes and the game going live. So there's always going to be some download component to it. But it's nice to have these boxes on the shelf. And we even had boxes have boxes for Strong Kingdoms, the MMO, which isn't a large client. It's not like it needs a CD, but for collectors, it's a really nice thing to have at home. And I have to say, for me, it's always very interesting when I go into large electronics stores and I see the games that I've worked on the shelf. It's a cool feeling.
Right. So I suppose we should talk more about Stronghold. For example, what is this franchise? Because it's a very long running series, and people may have heard of it, but it's not. It's not super big like, say, Age of Empires is.
Yeah, Stronghold is, I mean, to describe it, it's a medieval real-time strategy game. And there are a couple of those out there, but something that Stronghold does especially well, in my opinion, my personal opinion, is the whole micromanagement aspect and the realism of how the villages and the castles work. So what you do is you build up an economy that goes a bit beyond just creating bread, like having one building that creates bread, but you have these supply and production chains. So for instance, you'd grow some wheat that is then brought to the stockpile, then you build a mill, someone takes the wheat from the stockpile, makes flour out of it, and then someone from the bakers creates bread and puts that into the granary. And that's how a lot of the resources are generated and created. So you have that whole town simulation management aspect to it. And then obviously there's the military part. You build up your castle, you build up your forces, and you try to destroy the castles of your enemies. And there's one factor in Stronghold that's fairly unique, and that is a sense of popularity. So while in other games like Age of Empires, for instance, you would create new villagers by just paying what is it, food for them? Like what was in Age of Empires? 50 food gives you one villager. In
something like that.
Stronghold, in Stronghold, you need to earn them. So you need to prove yourself as a benevolent ruler, and then they will come to you. So depending on the popularity that you have within your kingdom, people will either come to your village or leave your village. So if you don't watch out, if you don't give them enough food to eat, then you might find yourself without any villagers whatsoever, and then you can't recruit any soldiers, and that's always a pickle you want to try to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And how has the series changed over the various releases? And indeed, there's also a is it a spin-off sub-series, the Crusader line?
Yeah, it all started with Stronghold 1, which takes place in medieval Europe or medieval UK. And after that came out, it was a large success back in 2001. Firefly decided to kind of use that formula but try it out in a different setting. So they created Crusader, which takes the same mechanics and the same principle but places it into the setting of the Crusades. So in the Middle East, in the deserts, with new units, new types of architecture in the castle, and also a bit more. Crusader had more of a combat-orientated focus, so it was a lot more fighting. They used fire a lot more. So unlike in the first Stronghold, you would have these slaves that wielded torches, and they would just go into the enemy's castle, set fire to a building, and if the enemy didn't have any wells, then that fire would just spread and destroy everything in its sight. So it was a lot more combat based. Um, and then for the next title, they decided to go a bit more into the simulation aspect again, like the whole economy and popularity with Stronghold 2. And that's also where the series went from 2D to 3D.
Oh man, I love them one-dimensional games.
Yeah.
You have to like get things further along the line.
Yeah, we can cut that out, right?
We're
In-
live.
Implying we have an editing budget.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. It's like this is all live, so what gets recorded gets recorded. Like, it's precisely because we don't want to be editing 3-4 episodes a week.
Completely understandable.
Anyway, so the latest release I think is Stronghold 3, or is it like Crusader 2?
The latest release is, well, the latest new release, like complete new game, is Crusader 2. Yeah. When I joined back in 2010, we were developing Stronghold 3. And after the whole Stronghold 3 release and reception and the troubles with publishers, we then went indie, concentrated on Kingdoms for a while, and then created Strong Crusader 2, which came out in 2014. So it's also been quite a while. And we're currently working on the next big Stronghold title, so that is coming. But the latest release in that sense has been Stronghold 2 Steam Edition. So what we've been doing is we've been going back through the old games, updating them to HD graphics, getting better resolutions, and adding Steam features like Steam Multiplayer, Steam Achievements, and all these types of things, and the Steam Workshop as well. And multiplayer was really important because the older games used Game Ranger as a multiplayer tool, but fortunately they shut down. So a lot of the players were still playing it even 14 years after release, but didn't have a chance to have any multiplayer games. So we decided we're going to integrate that via Steam and re-release those games. So those were the smaller projects we've been working on and releasing in the last few years. And then, of course, there's been a complete other game that we just brought out, but I assume we can talk about that a bit later.
Right. Yeah. Before we move on to that, I do have a few more questions about Stronghold. Namely, has Firefly ever tried to translate this series to consoles and/or mobile devices?
Stronghold Kingdoms, the MMO, is available on mobile, so you can get that on iOS and Android. We released that in summer. So it's been one of the things that players have been asking for years, and we were finally able to make it work and make it happen, which is difficult as a small studio when you don't have that many programmers. But yeah, we released that on iOS and Android, and that one works well because it's a game that doesn't require very fast, immediate reaction and action. So it works well on a mobile interface. The other games, however, the typical Stronghold games, they're typical real-time strategy games for the computer, and playing those with a console touch gamepad or even on a touch screen, it wouldn't work. They're made for keyboard and mouse.
Touchscreen is the least bad option there, but a keyboard and mouse is still best.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it would be great to see Stronghold on, PlayStation or Xbox, but the experience of the game just wouldn't make it justice.
I'd imagine if that were ever to actually happen, it would have to be transposed, so to speak. As in, it would have to be a completely new game style that had the Stronghold name on it.
Yeah, it would have to be a different game. And that's currently not our plan. So what we want to do is we want to continue making the PC Stronghold games that players love.
Indeed. But as you noted, you are taking different turns at this point in time, namely with the recently released, at least in early access, Metamorph. Now, I believe we have a trailer for that.
We have several trailers.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we could play like the reveal trailer and then have the other trailers play while we continue the interview.
Alrighty. Anyway, give me one moment.
Just give us a second here.
Alright. Everything should be ready.
Excellent. So as you can see, Metamorph is quite a departure from anything else that Firefly has done in the past. And I suppose my first question is, indeed, where did this game come from?
It's a departure from everything Firefly has released in the past. It's not a departure from everything Firefly has done in the past. So when I first saw the concept for Metamorph, I was also taken back a bit. I was surprised because there hasn't been anything like it since I joined the company. But there's a bit of history to the whole concept of doing a dungeon-y type of game. And that is that back in, I believe it was 2005, they were developing a game called Dungeon Hero, which was supposed to be a game where you explore the life inside a dungeon. So it would be an RPG type game where you go through dungeons, but you look at them from the perspective of the people living there. So most dungeons, it's someone else coming in and just breaking things and screwing shit up. But this game was supposed to look at it from a bit of a different side with the typical Firefly Studios humor. And that project unfortunately never finished. This is again due to regarding publishing and working with publishers. So unfortunately that project died and Firefly wasn't able to really do anything with what they had created for quite a long time. But a couple of years later, they decided, okay, we're going to give this dungeon thing another shot. Metamorph was created. And it's not a typical dungeon crawler in the sense that you go in and you just hack and slash your way through, and that's all about speed and just hitting the fight button. It's a very tactical game, so it has a lot of the DNA from the Stronghold games, in the sense that you go in and you have a range of heroes that you switch between, that you morph between within each dungeon, within each level. And for each of those heroes, you can select which powers and abilities they take in. So a lot of the dungeons can only be conquered if you strategically go through them and solve a lot of the puzzles and combine the abilities to your best ability.
And I also noticed that we've got like different protagonists than usual. Like usually when we have a dungeon crawler set up, it's some sort of wizard, rogue, magician thing. But we've got a rabbit, a nymph, and an ogre.
And that ogre is very large.
I mean, these are usually the types you would find as enemies in a lot of games. But yeah, I mean, Firefly, we don't like doing standard things. So anything that's predictable is boring, which can also be seen in Space Colony. I don't know if you've played Space Colony before, which is a base builder out in space. It's just wacky. It's just full of jokes and references and crazy characters. So yeah, we like doing non-standard things. And that's why it was important to have characters that aren't the usual maze, wood elf or whatever you'd expect.
Right.
To having these RPG type top-down games. Yeah, we played around with several elements, and then we decided that those three, the rabbit, the ice ogre, and the nymph, would make it into the early access. But we're obviously still going to expand on that roster of characters so that when players go into fighting situations, they can choose from a longer list of characters to go in with. And we'll be releasing those during the early access period as well.
Now, have you decided if you're just going to be able to...
access is for us to develop
Have you decided if it's just going to be 3 characters like per run, or can you have more than 3 later on?
Right now, we're planning on 3 per run. Depending on the feedback we get from our early access players, we might change that. if we feel that it fits well into the game and allows for smoother gameplay. Or for some dungeons, we might even restrict it to fewer than that. But as I said, it depends on what players report to us. That's why we're in the early access, because we want to develop this game together with the community of players that we know, and have their influence being shown in the game as well.
And how much of the game has been built already?
Do you mean like 80% kind of thing, or?
Well, yeah, in terms of like content, maps, that what have you, like how much is there right now, and how much do you plan on adding during the early access phase?
I actually have to think about this for a moment, because I remember discussing this with one of the programmers recently. Um, Let me just say we have big plans of adding quite a lot of content between now and the official release. Um, I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, but what we've released so far is a very good representation of the game, and it gives players a few hours of joy and challenge and hopefully excitement. But it's by far not what they're going to get once we're done working on it. And it does also depend on what players tell us and how players like it. So if we find that there are certain things that players really enjoy, we'll add more of that. Um, so there's no real upper limit for us in terms of adding new content, adding new dungeons, creating new enemies, creating new heroes, as long as we feel that it fits into the game.
Makes sense. And is the early access period like a set amount, or is that until you feel you're ready to um, you're complete?
We have the philosophy of it's ready when it's ready. It's one of the great things of being an indie studio. We can make that decision for ourselves, um, and that way we can adjust the game based on what players want. And once we feel that this is worthy of the full game, that this is what we wanted to create, then it's ready. But we don't have a certain timestamp on that. No.
Yeah, that's fairly common. You know, it's like there are games out there on Steam that have that are still in early access and have been there for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, we don't plan on being one of those early access hogs in any way. We are planning on finishing the game and releasing it. And even after release, we'll obviously still update and we'll still add new content. For us, the early access is really to get player feedback and develop the game together with the players. Have you guys played it?
No, I don't think anyone here has the game currently.
I don't think so either.
We'll need to change that.
Yeah. I think I put in a request for codes, but they never showed up. But anyway, yeah. So is this just a single player affair, or can you play with multiple people?
This is a single player adventure, yes.
And was there any particular rationale behind that? Because with a lot of dungeon crawlers, it does have a multiplayer component.
There were a few concepts that were flying around and being laid out when the game was developed. I'm honestly not sure why, in the end, they decided to release it as a single player first. But since it's in early access, I would say anything is still possible. So depending on the feedback we get, it might be possible to still have a multiplayer version of it.
I mean, you have to rebalance everything if you had different people controlling the different things at once instead of swapping.
Yeah, it would have to be a different gameplay style or a different game mode added to the game. The way it currently is, it's very focused towards giving single players a specific challenge. and specific puzzles. If two people entered the dungeon at the same time, at least the existing dungeons, it would be way too easy. And we don't do easy.
Right, and another aspect that I don't think we've talked about yet is the timer, because I've seen some footage where you're solving puzzles and you only have a limited amount of time to get through a dungeon. Right? And is that an optional thing, or is the timer like the main focus of this game? You know, get as far as you can under a certain amount of time.
It depends on the levels. There are select dungeons where you will need to go from a point A to a point B within a certain time in order to progress. And if you don't make it, you can go back to point A and reactivate the door or whatever and make your way to point B. But there's no timer in which you have to complete the level as a whole. Most levels will have a timer in them that will just display, or you'll get bonus points. You'll get more stars if you finish the level in a certain amount of time, but you don't have to do that. So when you go into dungeon, there are several ways that you can play. You have several objectives, like saving some of the creatures that live in the dungeon, and not all of those objectives can necessarily be met at the same time. So you'll decide whether you're going to go for a fast run, whether you're going to be particularly sneaky, whether you're going to collect lots of gold, or whether you're going to save all the people there. And you can also go back, of course, into the dungeons and play them in a different style after you finish them once. So each level has multiple ways of you exploring the game and interacting with it.
Now, are the dungeon levels procedurally generated, or are they actually designed?
They are designed. We have a very talented level designer, Steven, who makes most of the levels, and yeah, they are made by hand. Procedural generation, that's something that would work in a purely hack and slash sort of dungeon environment. But as I said, it's quite a strategic and tactical game where you will have to solve several puzzles. So creating them procedurally just doesn't give that same style of gameplay that we're looking for and that we're aiming for.
Like, I'll be honest, I was expected procedural generation because, yeah, as you noted, like when one of these hacking slashes comes onto the show, it's procedurally generated because it's about the combat, not necessarily the dungeon itself. And that seems to be the focus you've taken here. Like, and in terms of puzzles, what can a player expect? And do like the player, the monster's powers, how do those interact with said puzzles?
So the easiest to explain would, for instance, be that there are lots of traps spread across each of the dungeons, and most of those traps also cause damage to your enemies. So sometimes it's not a question of how fast can I go in and just kill everyone, especially when you're going up against hordes that are way too large for you to deal with, but how can I manipulate my enemies in a way that they will almost kill themselves or go into these traps? How can I lay traps for them? So that's a big puzzle part of a lot of the dungeons, trying to get reactions out of your enemies that will benefit you. That goes beyond just taking your sword and trying to slash at the throat.
And how many dungeon levels are there? And how do you? I'm trying to think. Is it going to be like the same run every time, or is there ways to like have more dungeons or different dungeons?
At the moment, there's around 60, if I remember correctly. I need to check which the last update was. There should be around 60 dungeons. They all obviously get harder the further you progress.
Right.
So it's unlikely that most players will immediately manage to complete all those dungeons before the next update is released that adds new content. So it does get more difficult. I mean, you can go back to earlier levels and gain more gold and upgrade your skills and unlock new skills that way. Um, but it does require some skill to complete the game. So we're not too worried at the moment that players buy the early access version and find themselves without content or gameplay after a few hours.
And are there boss encounters?
Yes, there's ultimately you fight the Lords of Death. They represent the big bosses, um, and at the moment in the early access version, the main boss is the Butcher. He obviously represents gluttony. He's quite a huge, large, disgusting demon creature that will just smash you as soon as you come near him. And what you're doing in the early access version is you're trying to find him. You're searching for him. You want to defeat him in order to save the world that's above the dungeons from the grip of death. And you encounter him multiple times as well. So it's not that you meet a boss once and then you defeat him and he's gone, but you'll have smaller fights with him before you have the real big encounter where you get to take him out and then proceed to the next one.
And is there any sort of story to this game?
It is mainly a game that you just pick up and play. So it's a casual game in that sort and doesn't have a large story to it. I already hinted towards it a bit. You're trying to defeat the Lords of Death and ultimately Death himself, because the land you come from, so what's above Earth, has been captured and controlled by the forces of Death, and you're trying to rid the evil spirits. So you're fighting a lot of demons and spirit monsters, and along the way you pick up the souls of fallen heroes. So you begin as the rabbit and you pick up the souls of the ogre and the nymph and all the other characters, and you take in their power, and that's when you start. Like that's what allows you to morph into them, and you're basically reuniting all these forces and all these fallen heroes in order to save the world. But yeah, the story does not play a big part in the game. It is more of a I'm just gonna open it up and have fun fighting my way through the dungeons.
Neat. And how well does this game play with a controller versus a keyboard and mouse? Like, what is the preferred input method?
At the moment, it doesn't play at all with the controller, but that is something we're working on. That's something I've been pushing for as well, because I have to admit, although I do play only PC at the moment, I play most of my games with controller just because I prefer the feeling of having a controller in hand. So that's something we're working on at the moment, and that's something that will come at some point. And I hope and I assume that it's going to work just as well, if not even better.
Well, it's a gameplay style that lends itself rather well to a controller. Certainly,
Exactly.
Certainly better than, say, an RTS.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And let's see. So is this game being built in, say, Unity or Unreal, or using like
it's a Unity-based game.
Not surprising. Uh, so many developers we have on the program are doing something in Unity. Was there a particular reason you selected Unity?
I can't confirm this 100%, but my guess is that due to the ease of using it, I mean, it does offer quite a lot of support to game developers. we created the Strong Kingdoms, the mobile version in Unity, and so our team was already used to using Unity and developing with that, and I'm sure that played a big role in choosing it. But a detailed reason I honestly can't give you.
I'm like, there are a few reasons why Unity is selected. Ease of use is one of them. Another is proliferation, and that gets to versions. Is this game just being built for the PC, or is it going to appear on Mac and Linux as well?
At the moment, just PC. In the early access, whatever happens beyond that point will happen. So we do have a track record of creating Mac versions of the game after release of our games. So a couple of the Stronghold games came out for the Mac as well. Linux, unlikely.
Yeah,
unlikely.
Sometimes that happens.
Would be cool. Yeah.
I'm sure it's due to, well, the typical reasons games don't hit Linux. It's not all that popular as a gaming platform, and there are a lot of versions of Linux. So,
no, I kind of have an associated question. Depending on how controller support goes, will you consider pursuing consoles?
For Metamorph?
Yes.
Maybe. I think that's all I'm allowed to say at the moment. Maybe.
Like, duly noted. And in terms of pricing, how much is it going for right now, and will the pricing structure change as it goes through the early access into formal release?
I assume most of your views are US. I can't actually tell you what the US value is at the moment.
It is on Steam, right?
Yes.
I can pull that up.
$10.
Something like that.
It should be 7 or 8 quid if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I got the prices here. Regular price USD 9.99, 9.99 euros, and 6.99 Great British pounds.
That's it. That's the thing. When you're doing community management in Germany, where they use euros, working for a company that's from London where they use pounds, and then speaking to people from the US, you always mix those numbers a bit up. But yes, thank you for looking them up.
No problem.
$10. Will the price change once we go into full release? That is likely, but it's something we can't really foresee at the moment. It all depends on how it goes. I mean, if you're worried that it goes up, I mean, by all means, everyone listening, go and buy it now in the early access price.
And how would you deal with the post-release content? Would it be paid DLC, or would you add it for free?
I'm sure we'll figure out a system to do that that will fit the game once it's released. It's a difficult thing to answer in the current position. I mean, if we look at previous games like Strong Crusader 2, then we did have paid DLC, so paid updates, but also free updates alongside that. So my best guess is that it will be a mix, but that's nothing I can confirm or deny in any way.
Right. Those details will emerge as things go along, especially
they will. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the times when you try to figure out answers to these types of questions, it's a situation that things are still kept secrets, and studios don't really want to talk about their financial plans. Now, we've always been fairly open about what we're planning to do in the long run, and what we're working on and where things are going with development. But we are so early in the development for Metamorph in that sense that we just don't know ourselves.
Yeah, because this game has only been out for a little more than a month in early access. That's not a great deal of time. Especially since, from what you've told us, it sounds like this game is going to spend quite a bit of time in early access. Anyway, so we are getting...
depends on the feedback we get, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so we are getting low on time here, so I'll see if my colleagues have any final questions about Metamorph here, or a Stronghold for that matter.
I asked everything I had.
Yeah, I think I covered most of my things too. It looks like an Metamorph looks like a pretty interesting game, and I think it would be a pretty good fit on consoles if you ever go around and do that. So,
I will let them know. I absolutely agree.
Indeed. Right.
Yeah,
so I guess
thanks for having me in. Thanks for the great chat.
No problem. No problem.
And I'll make sure that you guys get those codes. Okay. Don't know what went wrong there in the communication, but we will have those soon, and then you can give it a go yourselves.
Well, I put in a new do distribute request, so hopefully that'll be taken care of. So anyway, yeah, the game is Metamorph. It's available now in early access in Steam for $9.99 USD, €9.99 euros, and £6.99 pounds. And seems to be a very interesting game, and I'm looking forward to playing it. And hopefully we'll have you back on the program when a project beyond Metamorph emerges, and indeed when Metamorph's further down the line towards release.
Yeah, not just Metamorph. We're currently working on the next big Stronghold title, still called Stronghold Next. That's a working title so far that we've announced, and we're actually announcing the proper title, I believe, sometime very, very soon. So anyone listening who's a Stronghold fan and wants to know more about the special characteristics of the next big PC title, make sure to follow Firefly Studios on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be releasing videos every week there about the various games in development. So if you want to stay up to date, follow us there.
All right. So that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for our main show, where we'll be having my cousin Andrew, who's the head of a company called Steelwool, and we'll be talking about some Warhammer 40K, the Horus Heresy. I'm sure Gallix over there is looking forward to that. Anyway, until tomorrow, I wish you good gaming.